This is one of these things where it's not really news, but I kind of wanted to talk about it anyway because it was brought up the other day on Twitter, and it did garner a pretty reasonable discussion. Today I wanted to go over to a tweet made by Biz Nasty. Paul Bissonnette of TNT, of Spit and Chicklets, formerly of the NHL, and of many other things. He made a tweet on September 10th talking about a guy who is still, at the time of me recording this audio, on the free agent market. Phil Kessel can't even get a PTO. I got a freaking PTO. You're telling me half the teams couldn't use Phil Kessel at camp? And this tweet, understandably so, got 587,000 views, 5.8k likes, a whole bunch of replies, a whole bunch of retweets, and there was a pretty interesting discussion had in the replies below. Shell Hero says, "To be fair, Phil Kessel's intention is to play games. Yours was to shower with the fellas again." Bissonnette replies, "That's the best part of playing. A little, okay, I'm not even gonna say that, eh? Oh boy." But because Phil Kessel's name was tossed out there as a guy that Bissonnette is angrily tweeting out is still unsigned, I did want to go out there and make this video just kind of talking about Phil Kessel, going over him and his status as a player and what we'd recently seen out of him, because Phil Kessel is currently the NHL's leader on the Iron Man streak. If you go over to the Wikipedia article and you look at the 500 consecutive games played list, Phil Kessel is the number one guy, with 1,064 games. Now the thing is, the streak is technically active, because this Iron Man consecutive games played thing only applies to games that the player is eligible to play. And if you go over to Phil Kessel and his log over the past few years, you'll note that ever since 2009-2010, the guy has played every single game that he has been eligible to play. 82 games in the full-length years, 48 games in the 2013 lockout year, 70 games played in the 2019-20 season when COVID hit and shut down the league, 56 games played in the shortened season afterwards, and then 82 games with the Coyotes and the Golden Knights. Now, Kessel didn't play the games in the playoffs as much in the 2023 Golden Knights Championship, but he was a part of the team, he was in the locker room, he was participating in practice. While he wasn't, utilized, he still got his name on the cup for the third time in his career because he had played the full season on the regular season team, therefore validating his status to be included. Phil Kessel, though, did not play in 2023-2024, thus allowing his Ironman streak to continue. This is where we get into the interesting details about that streak. Now, of course, if you've been paying attention to the NHL and everything that's been going on the past year and a bit, you would have known that Phil Kessel was actually linked to an NHL team sometime in February and March of this previous season. As far back as 6 months ago, we were talking about the idea of Phil Kessel and the Vancouver Canucks. We made multiple videos about this because it was very apparent that Phil Kessel was interested in signing some sort of a contract with Vancouver. He was practicing with the AHL farm team, he was training with the Sedins, he had the jersey on and everything. It was a really big deal. And we had heard from some insiders around the NHL world that any sort of a signing, any sort of a contract that Kessel would agree to, it wouldn't have any sort of implications or clauses within it that said, hey, he has to play all the games that he's eligible for. He has to keep up that Iron Man streak. The sentiment that was going around was that Phil the Thrill was okay with jeopardizing that Iron Man streak if it meant actually getting a role in a team and being brought on to a squad that wanted him and his services. Whatever team it was that got him, they didn't need to commit to his Iron Man streak existing in order for him to agree. He was okay with going anywhere. But after Phil Kessel worked out with the Vancouver Canucks, he worked with the Abbotsford Canucks, he was out there for their practices, things started to take a little bit of a negative turn. The folks that were watching the Abby Canucks practice, they ended up saying hey, Kessel's not really that polished, he's not really standing out as much as he probably should, and I don't know, he's not really looking like a guy that deserves a contract. And then eventually the timeline expiration date came and went, and Phil Kessel was not signed, and he ended up finishing off 2023-2024 without an NHL team. Now, it's been over a calendar year since he's played a hockey game professionally, and he's still a free agent. And so, hearing Biz Nasty saying, yeah, no, this guy doesn't have a contract yet, are you serious? It does kind of get the gears turning as to what possibilities there could be. Here's a reply on the initial tweet by Biz Nasty. Pittsburgh had a dumpster fire of a power play last season. They could have used Kessel in the half wall. They would have made the playoffs if they had him last year. Then one of the replies says, I'd bake Kyle Dubas a cake if he brought Phil the Thrill back. That's so funny. Ay, ay, ay. Talk about the Leafs and Pittsburgh connection, eh? You've got a bunch of other people in the replies saying things like, oh, he's a proven winner, he's gotten all these awards, he's gotten all these championships, he's gotten all this stuff to his name, and he is a guy that for some reason teams just don't believe in at this point. And honestly, I'd say that the Vancouver Canucks stint that he had, or the Abbotsford Canucks stint, I guess, was a lot more of an indicator as to where his NHL projectability lied in that position, mostly because, he was practicing with the Abby Canucks in February, March, right? The NHL season begins in October, so for Phil Kessel to sit out October, November, December, and January before lacing the skates back up and then practicing with an AHL team and not looking all too great, it was kind of like, okay, maybe the time has passed a little bit for this guy. Not saying that he'll never be able to play in the NHL ever again, it's just he had spent too much time off, and the way that Phil Kessel plays, he kind of has to rely on that speed and that snapshot. That's what makes him so effective. So when he doesn't have that, then what else is he bringing to the table? Now, he's had an entire off-season's worth of time to continuously train and hopefully get his body back into shape. Maybe the Abby Canucks stint could have been like a wake-up call for Phil the Thrill to kind of get back onto the horse and start kicking things back into gear. Not saying, of course, that he was pissed off or sad that he didn't get signed by the Vancouver Canucks, but when you consider what the Canucks were attempting to do and what avenues they went down to try to achieve that, they were trying to be competitive. They were really pushing themselves to the limit in 2023-2024, and Alvin and Rutherford were giving one of their former superstars in Phil Kessel a chance to be a part of it. Honestly, when you think about the guys the Vancouver Canucks had suiting up for them in the playoffs last year, like Vasily Podkolzin, like a Linus Karlsson, like a Nils Åman, these guys played games with the Vancouver Canucks. And when you think about it, okay, let's imagine that Phil Kessel was still the same 36-point guy he had in 82 games with the Vegas Golden Knights the year prior. That version of Phil Kessel is probably a lot more dangerous in the bottom six of a Vancouver Canucks team than Nils Åman is, unfortunately. So the fact that Phil Kessel a year later was not able to crack the Vancouver Canucks when they had themselves that kind of a depth lining up in the bottom of their forward lines, I don't know about you, but it kind of makes me think, hey, hopefully this guy's really able to get back into gear. It just doesn't seem like he brought enough to the table for the Vancouver Canucks. And for any Canucks fans that are going to go out there into this video's comment section and say, hey, he should sign in Vancouver again, get him the PTO with the Canucks. Alvin and Rutherford, give him a chance. He'll show up. If he's better than a Phil DiGiuseppe or a Nils Åman or a Linus Karlsson, then you have your 13th forward right there. The thing is, it's going to be even more difficult for Phil Kessel to crack the Vancouver Canucks forward core in 2024-2025. This forward core replaced the needs for guys like Podkolzin, Åman, Karlsson, and Phil DiGiuseppe with Danton Heinen, Kiefer Sherwood, Jake DeBrusk, Daniel Sprong. You have these four new guys added on to Pettersson, Miller, Besser, Pius Suter, Teddy Bluger, Dakota Joshua, Connor Garland, and Niels Höglander. That's a group of 12, and it's a really good group of 12, too. Unless anybody gets injured, there isn't really a direct avenue for a guy like Phil Kessel to leapfrog Åman, DiGiuseppe, and Linus Karlsson and take over one of those winger spots. If there are other teams out there in the NHL that could use a guy like Phil Kessel, honestly, be my guest. Sign this guy to a PTO, bring him back into the NHL, give him that opportunity to extend that Ironman streak. Now, we know that that Ironman streak is probably going to last for a really long time. The second place guy, Keith Yandel, he had his Ironman streak broken when he was scratched by the Flyers, and then some of the other guys that were Ironmen were playing in the 70s and the 80s, and Patty Marleau is already retired, so he's no threat. Brent Burns is the next active guy on the list. He's got 843 games played. It's still going on, so we'll see if there is a chance for Kessel to extend that lead. But for now, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about Phil Kessel and his entire PTO situation. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.